a friend. Now, we tried this before, it didn't work very well, so we're doing it again. Also, Suicide Squad, we're going to talk about that, because the Suicide Squad, the 2021 version, the remixed, redone James Gunn version, is a bit of a bomb at the box office. Now, there's obviously a whole bunch of reasons for this, including the most obvious go-to reason of everything that we're currently going through, but there's also a few other factors to break down, which I think do make for interesting talking points alongside. Now, it's also worth pointing out up front that this is not any mark against the quality of the film itself. As you know, and you've said in your own review, which obviously we totally recommend, the movie itself is brilliant. It's clearly the best thing that DC have done in a long time. So if you get the chance to actually go see it, you should. But at the same time, there is this whole conversation around what's actually happened with the movie and the fact that it's not bringing in the pennies at the box office. So what's your opening thoughts on this before we start breaking some stuff down?
My main instant one to go with is that I'm not massively surprised given the state of the world at the minute in regards to how quickly the ongoing global situation has kind of evolved over the last few months in particular.
It's been a while.
We kind of got to the point where, with the success of different measures like the vaccine and stuff, that, things look to be calming down a little bit, and then we've got this new variant, and then that leads into all other different things. So I think that even though we will compare and contrast the Suicide Squad's performance with earlier Warner Brothers releases like Godzilla vs. Kong and what was the other one? They did another one. Was The Conjuring Warner Brothers as well? I can't remember.
Yeah. There's quite a few things that have come out. Obviously, there's F9, Fast 9, Fast 9,
but like
whatever we're calling it.
Yeah, but like I think specifically over the last even like few weeks, things have changed so rapidly that. To the point where, I'm not doing stuff that I felt comfortable doing a few weeks ago because things have gotten so crazy. So I definitely think that the rapidly evolving situation of the global panini is definitely affecting things. So that is definitely the main overriding thing here. And I don't think obviously there are other influences too that will have, impacted this in one way or another. But the main reason why this film has lost money, I mean, we can talk about how big the budget was later on as well. But the main reason why is because we live in a completely different world to the one we lived in 2019, and also because Warner Brothers have shifted their release strategy. So now obviously the Suicide Squad did release on HBO Max as well in the United States, which will have taken a big chunk out of, presumably taken a big chunk out of the receipts that you would have gotten in actual cinemas. So again, I'm going to echo what you said at the beginning. It's not a mark against the film itself. If you enjoyed the Suicide Squad, these numbers shouldn't really mean that much to you unless you feel as though it's going to inhibit any kind of potential follow-up. But, certainly it's the best thing DC have done since, in live action terms, since The Dark Knight. And it's a shame that, maybe, it hasn't resonated potentially as much as it should have. Although again, just to reiterate, the reason why it has underperformed so dramatically is because of the ongoing global situation. Yeah,
I think that's obviously the thing that the undercurrent of everything else. But I think it's worth kind of exploring the reality of where the Suicide Squad brand is at as well, and the fact that we had the big 2016 one that was one of the worst movies in recent memory.
It was bad. It was a big old pile of poo.
Yeah. One of the most stapled together corporate influence hack jobs in recent memory. And I think that thing for me, if I'm talking completely personally, that did cloud over the new movie, where I was kind of just sitting there going like, well, we've tried this, and now you've gone back and you actually got James Gunn in, and you make more of an effort to prioritize quality. For me personally, I was like, well, I'm not going to give you the money up front. It was actually your review that made me go like, okay, fine, I will go see this thing because it seems like it's actually coming together pretty well. But I think if we're talking wider audience, that whole kind of conversation that happens with the mainstream audience, to me, I always think, well, everyone has that movie-loving friend or the game-playing friend or whatever it is. And I think that a lot of people's movie-going friends have probably sat back and gone like, well, I don't know if this is worth it. Even though the critical reception was quite positive, I think alongside the things that you mentioned before, it doesn't create this attitude of, I need to be there day one. I think it's way more cautious. And I wonder if that affects the overall tail on box office numbers or the overall tail on cinema goers, the attitude towards the cinema, because things are so different, and it's not like you're running out day one, because it varies cinema to cinema, country to country, on whether or not it feels safe or not. So there is that. But also to sort of like bring another thing in, for me personally, I don't think they nailed the marketing very well. I kind of, until the movie was actually out, and it was you that was talking about it, or Andy Murray's gone to see it as well, saying like it is definitely a sequel. Like there are references to the 2016 movie in there. I definitely didn't get that, like in the run up to stuff. I know that obviously it's a identifiable, distinguishable version of the Suicide Squad, but I didn't really know what the hell it was. I didn't know whether they were going, we're wiping, just forget the 2016 one happened, or what their whole general approach to it was. And I wonder how much that is the case with a wider audience as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion, that, because certainly for me, I felt as though the new art direction and overall design and aesthetic of this movie appealed to me way more than the kind of faux sportswear boutique, washed out look
Hot
that
topic
2016 Suicide Squad was going for. So I guess the thing is, it's a very much a self-contained adventure, and I think that's very much intentional in the idea that acknowledging that the last Suicide Squad, even though it was a financial behemoth of a movie, it did not cut the mustard when it came to, the actual quality. So I feel as though every single decision there, the marketing, in terms of the actual visual look, very much intentional way of saying we are divesting from what came before. This is very much James Gunn's vision for the Suicide Squad. You don't need and I guess maybe the question there is, even though, you could argue that maybe with the marketing, they definitely emphasize that this isn't the Suicide Squad you remember.
Right.
Did they maybe not do a good enough job of explaining to people? I've kind of forgotten what was going on my point there, but kind of basically, obviously making it its own distinct thing, but certainly maybe there was that kind of hangover question of, well, it's still the same thing of the movie that, kind of underwhelmed me in 2016.
Yeah, at some point they do need to, obviously they need to rely on or lean on the Suicide Squad as an IP. And I personally don't have any attachment to that. I know from the 2016 one, I know that Deadshot is a villain. I know he's a thing that I shot in one of the Batman Arkham games, but I don't really have that much of a tie to the overall story or the likes of Amanda Waller or whatever as characters. So as a casual fan of that stuff, it's not going to be the major draw that gets me in. It is going to be the James Gunn stuff. It is going to be the way that it's written, and the likes of King Shark and Weasel and everything else. But at the same time, I think that they could have front-loaded the marketing with that stuff a lot more. I think they could have done a bit more with just getting across the exact reason to go see it outside of, if you're not a Suicide Squad fan, you should go for this. And they laid that on with some of the trailers near launch, but I feel like overall maybe that stuff could have come together a bit better. We should talk about the R rating as well, because if you tie the budget to the fact that it's an R rating and compare it to the likes of Deadpool and other R-rated superhero movies that have come out and that have taken those risks, this thing's budget was like twice or three times as much as those other movies, which obviously being an R rating it obviously means that a massive chunk of the audience can't even see it. And I wonder how much that was a factor too, just the fact that they over budgeted and they were never going to be able to make their money back. So it's going to become a de facto bomb anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it is a hard R. It is really, really violent.
There's a full-on fatality in there.
Yeah, I mean, there are multiple ones, Scott Taylor.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I definitely agree. I pointed out in my review that I feel like, even though I love the movie, I do kind of just get a little bit frustrated sometimes now with the fact that a lot of superhero films, you can say to my face that the Avengers is still for kids or whatever, but at the end of the day, there aren't many comic movies that I think had that younger market in mind. Obviously, the beauty of the PG-13 rating is that it can appeal to everyone, whereas the R rating can't. And I guess that is always a thing to consider when you put an R rating on a movie. You are restricting who can actually end up and going to see it, and and then when you factor that in on top of the fact that cinemas aren't as accessible as they were because of the ongoing kind of situation, then that does lead to it all stacks on top of each other, and I would say it's a contributing factor, even though I definitely think the R rating in terms of quality, in terms of the overall vibe of the film works to its benefit. It is it's a cold hard fact that when you make a film that is R rated and it's got a bunch of colourful super villains and stuff in it, then you are definitely basically saying to the kids, and you'll lose receipts as a result.
Yeah, and it's that whole thing where an older audience is maybe someone who is more in touch with the conversations that were leading to the movie coming out, the potential reality of knowing about, bringing James Gunn in to try and make this work in a way that, in a similar way, at least to me, that they got Joss Whedon in to try and make Justice League work in a way that sort of rivals the way that he managed to do with the Avengers and the way that Marvel stuff has rolled out. We should talk about that as a wider thing too. I'm always fascinated, it's obviously going to be something that the comments can bring in from a wider audience standpoint or a casual moviegoer standpoint, because I wonder what the perception of DC films is to the widest audience possible. Does it feel like, Marvel are nailing this and DC have gone back and forth? They've obviously had some, massive successes. Even the likes of Joker, despite it being quite divisive, did go down fairly well. It made a hell of a lot of money. And it's that whole conversation around, but they have all these misfires, like Batman v Superman. The Snyder Cut I thought was really solid, but obviously it came after the Justice League getting everything wrong in the first place. And even the likes of Birds of Prey is really solid again, but they do have all this, it just feels really messy compared to, on the Marvel side, yes, it's potentially a factory-made product, but at least it's a product that you can look at and go, okay, that's a finished thing. They know what they're doing. They're building to something. They're paying it off. Whereas DC's approach has been one point shared universe, then it was all separate solo stuff, and now they're we don't really fully know exactly what they want to do.
We're doing everything now.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I think there's a lot to be said about the fact that, with Marvel, there is a lot to criticize about the idea that even though, I do think that, Marvel should be praised for the breadth of its offerings in terms of, the different genres that are on display there that, kind of riff on everything, and there's basically a movie for everyone's kind of superhero there. I would say that, it is does feel manufactured and sometimes a little bit it does fatigue you a little bit. And I always think that, DC's route here, which again, I did not care for Joker, but I do like the idea of them basically saying, well, we tried to match Marvel's efforts with the MCU by doing our own shared universe, or we made, Zack Snyder, Jeff Johns, that kind of group of people, the kind of creative focal point of our shared cinematic universe. It didn't work out. Let's just do the whole thing where we give an actual, creative force carte blanche to do whatever they want to do with the given project, whether that be Todd Phillips's really awful kind of pastiche of Scorsese films of the 70s and the Joker, or, James Gunn doing like a Dirty Dozen Kelly's Heroes war movie epic with the Suicide Squad and whatever Matt Reeves is doing with the Batman. I think that is the way to go about it, but the Suicide Squad performing in this scenario, again, is a massive outlier. We cannot reiterate this enough that because of the ongoing global situation that that's the biggest predominant thing here, but I do wonder if maybe DC might feel a little bit less confident about not going forward with one cohesive on-screen vision, because even though I personally did not care for those DC movies from 2013 to 2017, now, the box office receipts don't lie. It wasn't a vision I agreed with, but it's one that got butts and seats for a little bit. And again, the one thing you have to ask yourself there is, was that because it was one, singular aesthetic, creative vision, whatever, or was it just a case of people being curious and wanting to see what DC could do to bring to the MCU-y table?
Yeah, well, that was the thing. I mean, that whole boom period, like you said, between sort of like 2013, 2016, 2017, Batman v Superman, you had these massive tentpole releases. As I said, that was 2017.
No, Batman v Superman was 2016.
Was it? Okay,
Yeah.
That period anyway. That whole sort of like big event movie thing, they could hang a lot on that. I mean, who wasn't going to even be, interested in just seeing what that movie was? I think that they managed to do quite well with that. But it is that whole sort of wider conversation on where does DC sit in the minds of the average film goer versus where Marvel sits. And Marvel is dependable, they're reliable, you know what you're getting. And like you've said, they have managed to branch out quite confidently into the likes of the TV side of things as well. But DC, it does come across quite messily. And I think in regards to Suicide Squad, again, like I said at the beginning, it's no reflection on the quality of the film itself, but they've kind of just failed to get that across in a confident way, alongside the obvious reality of what we're all going through. I do think it's a hell of a talking point. I think it's interesting, because it's not like I didn't run to the cinema to see it. My whole thing was relating to the mess of 2016 and not wanting to just give them money straight away, but I am curious how much that is echoed across the wider sort of audience and stuff. Any closing thoughts, Mr. Ewan?
No, I just think, obviously, with the world we're living in, it might not be possible for you to any of the audience to go see the Suicide Squad right now, but when you get the opportunity and you feel safe or whatever and you can do it safely, absolutely do, because it is a hell of a time. And I just hope that we do get to see more James Gunny goodness with DC going forward, because he's already said that he's had conversations with WB about doing future projects. So I mean, again, it's one of those things. I do think that when Warner Brothers decided to basically put their entire 2021 slate to be both in theaters and on HBO Max, that was them just basically going, you know what, let's just take it on the chin. We can't just stop making movies, otherwise that could lead to some very terrifying implications for the cinema industry as a whole. So we just got to keep it going, and we're going to see more of this as the year goes on. We're going to see more films kind of not meeting box office standards. That like Dune, I imagine, probably won't do that well either. Won't Dune that well.
Yeah. I think, that's a whole other thing as well, is that we touched upon in the original version of this video before the camera decided to eat the thing. But I think that that whole thing around, the hybridized approach to marketing, to sales, or the idea of the box office being in your living room and how does that affect the viewing habits and the audience habits of going to the cinema, that's all we're at the very earliest nascent stages of that. And I wonder, obviously you can count the box office sales, but then you have to look at subscriber numbers. And there was the whole thing about the Snyder Cut didn't actually pay off that well for them in regards to people snapping up HBO Max subscriptions. And that's a harder thing to gauge in regards to success. like, is it, how do you even really look at that unless you look at how many people bought a subscription and the first thing they watched was that movie? Whether or not that's actually in the same way, it is comparable to a box office ticket sale or something. I think that's something that is going to be a long form conversation across the rest of this year, next year, and depending on whether or not they stick with those style of releases when things open up across next year anyway. So yeah, HBO Max, the whole idea of just being able to watch it at home, that's a whole other thing that is thrown in here alongside the R rating, alongside the marketing, and alongside the value of the Suicide Squad brand IP as it is. So we'll see. Let us know what you think down in the comments below. Did you seek out Suicide Squad, or are you waiting? Are you on the fence? Where are you? Let us know. For now though, I've been Scott from whatculture.com.
And I've been Ewan from whatculture.com. Doing it again. You've stressed the what.
And we'll catch you next time.
What culture?